Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight we're going to talk about several different things. Of course, we have to address the Gaza situation as the Israeli tanks and soldiers move forward with the bulldozers to continue with the genocide of the Palestinians and the extermination of what they consider the unfit Palestinians, I suppose. And, of course, we're going to talk about the Malaysian plane, since that is on everybody's mind currently. And again, this show is being recorded on July 23rd, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm sorry, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And the details, of course, are subject to change, as this is an ever-changing topic, but we're going to get into this as it stands at 6 p.m. on July 23rd, 2014. So we're going to try to get into it as best we can. Now, we've also got a local issue that we're going to try to bring up and hopefully get some more domestic concerns as well. But before I do, I'd like to remind you all that you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at ucy.tv. You can access the show's personal webpage at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. Now, the articles that I put out, if you want to follow those, you can look at theantimedia.org and activistpost.com. And of course, Activist Post is the publisher of the majority of my articles. The antimedia.org publishes them as well. You can search my articles specifically there, or, so I would recommend, if you're interested in my work specifically, then you can go to BrandonTurbeville.com, and that is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, the interviews, the archive versions of this show, and all of the relevant information there. Of course, you can find my books there as well. And I'm proud to announce that we are on the way to finding a Kindle edition, some type of online ebook format for people who want to save a little money, who have a Kindle or other type of reader, online reader, that wants to save money or just prefer to read books that way. I've had my books on hard copy format for quite some time, but it's time to move forward with that, especially with the cost of the books in the hard copy format. This type of production only goes, gets more and more expensive as we move on. But hopefully in the near future we're going to get that online book service up and running. Now, as I mentioned last week, I also want to promote an event, a series of events that's going to take place in Florence, South Carolina here, and these are a series of health talks and documentary viewings at Health First, which is the Health First Chiropractic and Wellness Center in Florence, South Carolina. It's located on Palmetto Street. In fact, I will get you the exact address here. It is 311 West Palmetto Street, Florence, South Carolina, 29501. Again, that is 311 West Palmetto Street, Florence, South Carolina, 29501. And I encourage you can find them on Facebook at Health First Radames Chiropractic Clinic. In fact, the name Ratames, Radames, Ratames, he is the doctor there, and he is going to be the person who directs the viewings and so forth. Again, 311 West Palmetto Street, Florence, South Carolina, 29501. If you're from out of state, if you're in the South Carolina, North Carolina region, and you want to get together with like-minded people, then this is the place to be. And if you want to, if you just want to educate yourself and have nothing to do, on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m., I should have said that earlier, it's Tuesday nights at 7 p.m., and this is supposed to be a rolling event. This is supposed to continue on every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. So if you're in the area, then come out, meet some like-minded people. If you'd like to educate yourself, then definitely come out. If you have nothing to do and you're bored, then come out. But If you're from pretty far away and you are planning a vacation to, I don't know, Myrtle Beach or something, then, or maybe Columbia, South Carolina, maybe even Charleston, maybe you should reschedule your vacation based on this event, and you can stop in if you want to meet like-minded people. It's always great to connect with people in person all over the country. So again, that's 311 West Palmetto Street, Florence, South Carolina, 29501, 7 p.m. on Tuesday nights, documentary viewing and so forth, and discussion and talks and all that good stuff. Going to be related to topics like chemtrails, fluoride, vaccines, and the like. So wanted to get that out there first off. Now I guess we should talk about Gaza. Last week we discussed the Israeli issue and the history basically of Israel and the nature of Hamas. And I said last week that we can't look at Hamas as if it were some kind of angelic force in the region. Hamas appeared partly due to the vacuum of leadership. Again, I mentioned before, and you can go back even a week further and listen to my interview with Dr. Gabriel Batarse, who is a Palestinian himself, who grew up before the Israelis set up their colony, who pointed out the fact that it was 30% Christians in Palestine before the Israelis established their silly state, and now it's 3% because the Israelis either drove them out or killed them. Most of the Christians spread out across Europe, went to America, or other places. And what was left were Muslims. And Muslims were, of course, persecuted and treated terribly. They have undergone a campaign of extermination. It's not just because they're Muslim, of course. It's because they don't, they're not part of a certain genetic line that other people are part of, namely the Israelis. And of course, non-Israeli Jews are treated equally bad in that area as well. But Hamas came about why some fundamentalist Islam was allowed to, or militant Islam was allowed to take hold in that area, particularly in Gaza, was simply because that there was nothing else. It was their only line of defense. It was their last line of defense. And of course, Hamas broke away from Fatah, who is the ruling Palestinian party, the ruling government. Hamas and Fatah are now in the process of re-engaging with one another and forming a coalition government. But it's also true that Israel has its tentacles in Hamas, if it didn't create it entirely. And there's evidence that it did, that it created Hamas in an attempt to control the opposition. So it didn't get this sort of unifying force of maybe Fatah or maybe some other type of unifying force in the region, but that it gets this militant Islamic version, which alienates a large number of people, a large number of Palestinians who aren't accepting of militant versions of any religion. But it also is a system that's easily triggered against Israel, so that Israel can then justify an incursion further into territory. It's the same thing that the Western intelligence agencies do with Islamic fundamentalists across the world in terms of terrorism and terrorist cells, and death squads, and ISIS and Al Qaeda and these sorts of groups. So that's what Hamas is, and again, if you want to get a more detailed explanation, then go to the archives and listen to last week. But of course, as the Israeli genocide, or should I say, the genocide against the Palestinians continues, and we have a number of celebrities who tweeted "Free Palestine," and then realized that it wasn't as trendy to oppose what is considered a genocide, and it's pretty open that it's a genocide. But they realized it wasn't as trendy, that certain people are more equal than others when you criticize foreign policy, foreign governments. And they've had to apologize because God forbid you criticize ISIS, Ra-El, Israel. God forbid you criticize them in any least way, especially when they're under operations of extermination against another people that they apparently see as inferior. Now, that being said, I think we should go to some quotes by some celebrities in their own right, not movie stars or sports stars or anything of this type, but to Israeli government officials and academics. Now, I've got an article up entitled "Netanyahu and Rahm Emanuel Agree Never Let a Crisis Go to Waste." And of course, we remember that slimy Rahm Emanuel, who's an Israeli dual citizen with the United States, of course, spent time in the Israeli Defense Forces fixing brakes. Apparently, his father was a terrorist with I think it was the Irgun, not 100%. Maybe it was Stern, but I think it was Irgun. His father, Emanuel's father, was a terrorist. It's funny. Some people are called terrorists, and others who are terrorists are their lineage is put into power as a mayor of Chicago or chief of staff under the Obama administration. But that's another topic. I think we remember Emmanuel's statement where he says, "You never let a serious crisis go to waste." And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before. And certainly the Obama crowd, the Obama regime, and Emmanuel's own Chicago machine have used that philosophy repeatedly, that you never let a crisis go to waste. But Bibi Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, we can't forget that he said similar things. And let me find this quote for you here, and it's in the article. But basically, he was asked back in 1989. He was responding. I think this was speaking at a university in Tel Aviv, and this was 1989, and he was the deputy foreign minister of Israel then. This is what Bibi has to say. He said, quote, "Israel should have exploited the repression of the demonstrations in China, Tiananmen Square, when world attention focused on that country to carry out mass expulsions among the Arabs of the territories," end quote. So basically what he's saying is that while we were all focused on Tiananmen Square, Israel should have made a push to expel Palestinians. And this was in 1989, and it's resurfacing now because as this plane goes down, then we have the Israeli invasion of Gaza, not letting a crisis go to waste while America is focused on planes and absolutely ridiculous propaganda assertions by Skull and Bones John Kerry, Marie Harf, I guess we call her Marie Barf, right? And Jen Psaki and the rest of the State Department crew, and of course Obama himself, making these ridiculous assertions with absolutely no evidence. But we'll talk about that in a few minutes. In fact, speaking of Bibi, I would suggest, this is going to sound very, very strange, but I would suggest that you go to YouTube and type in an interview between Benny Hinn and Benjamin Netanyahu and see what comes up. There's an interview, and I talked about this at some point, I think on the last show, about the history of the Israeli state, which is 1948. This is not some historical claim to land as it's represented. In fact, I mentioned that Zionism, the idea of creating a Jewish homeland with a right of return, and of course Christian Zionism, which is largely to blame for letting this garbage go through. This was a movement that was not created. This is not Christian in the historical sense, right? This is not Christianity. This is something that was created in the late 1800s. It was this idea of Christian Zionism, the creation of Jewish homeland in the Middle East. This was late 1800s, and it grew. And in fact, I mentioned that there were actually riots of Jews in England who did not want the creation of Israel. They said, this is not how it's supposed to be done. This is supposed to be done when the Messiah comes back, and you guys aren't the Messiah. And in fact, a lot of Jews continue to oppose the idea of creating Israel as a Jewish state. But in that interview between Bibi and Benny, you find out, for those of you who don't know, of course, Benny Hinn is this Zionist Israeli, I believe, preacher who was big in the early 90s on networks like TBN and so forth, where TBN sort of specializes in all-night marathons of stealing old people's money. And they've done very well at it for years and years and years. I'm sure they're still on there peddling the same garbage. But Benny was one of the biggest stars of the time. In fact, he had this huge mega church, as all of them did on TBN, and he was sort of the modern day miracle walker. I mean, he could throw God darts at people. He would grab God's power in his hand and fling it across the stage and knock people down with his healing spiritual power. Of course, it was all a big joke. I mean, it was all either a big act or people were just really believing this stuff so much that it happened. I mean, if you don't know who Benny Hinn is, I'm not going to sit here and give you a bio on Benny Hinn. You just go to YouTube and you'll have entertainment for hours. But he actually got so big at one point that 60 Minutes did an interview with him, which again, entertainment if you want to watch that and see what kind of con man he was. But again, I guess he and Bibi are two birds of the same feather. Two big con men. But he does an interview with Bibi because all of the audience that watches Benny Hinn were Christian Zionists, and he brings Bibi on to play the victim for the Christian Zionist audience. And Bibi pretty much gives you a history of Christian Zionism. He mentions that it was created in the late 1800s, and that it's the Christians play in a more important role really than Jews do, because he gives you the history and tells you that there were riots and opposition from Jews for the creation of Israel. Now that generally goes over the TBN viewer's head. That doesn't bat an eye because they're just happy that Jesus is coming back as soon as Israel gets formed and protected and wipes off other people off the face of the map, which is what they want apparently, and then Jesus is going to come back. So watch the interview and watch Bibi give you the history. If you doubt what I say, that Christian Zionism was a relatively recent formation, then watch the interview, and you'll get it from his own mouth that's what it was. So we've got now how many dead Palestinians in Gaza? I think at the time of the recording of this broadcast on July 23rd, I think we've hit over 300. Not really sure. There were 260 a few days ago, and I think that about 50 more were killed in the day since, so maybe even 50 were killed in this one day. I can't profess to give you the exact numbers, but I'm thinking we're over 300 dead Palestinians there. But speaking of enraging comments, now I want to draw your attention to my article, Israeli Professor Rape Palestinian Sisters and Mothers to Stop Terrorism. Now, this is really something here. This statement comes from Dr. Mordecai Kedar, or Kedar, I guess we'll call him Kedar. He is a Middle East scholar from Bar Ilan University in Israel, and let's see what else does he do? He is a fellow at the Bigan Sadat Center for Strategic Studies at Bar Ilan. He serves as the chairman of the Israel Academia Monitor Organization, and that is a group that is basically a witch hunter to go after Israeli academics who discuss the really non-debatable fact that Israel doesn't really have a right to exist as a Jewish state, right? And in fact, some Israeli academics have come to this conclusion by reading books and looking at history. But this guy, Dr. Kedar, is part of an organization that has been created to persecute them for their teachings if they don't toe the party line. So That's Dr. Kedar, but listen to his statements. He made these statements on Israeli radio, and there's a show called Hakul Deburim. It's All Talk. That's the name of the show. It's All Talk, and with host Yossi Hadar. So Dr. Kedar says the only thing that you have to understand the culture in which we live. The only thing that deters Hamas leaders is a threat to the connection between their heads and their shoulders. So Yossi Hadar asks, well, could that idea, that consideration, filter down the ranks of Hamas? Does it have to be just focused on the leaders? Will it also trickle down to the lower ranks? And Kedar says no, because lower down the considerations are entirely different. Terrorists like those who kidnapped the children and killed them. He's talking about the 3 Israeli teenagers. The only thing that deters them is if they know that their sister or their mother will be raped in the event that they are caught. What can you do? That's the culture in which we live. And he continues, and he says, we can't take such, the host, says, well, we can't take such steps, of course. But then Kedar jumps in and says, well, I'm not talking about what we should or shouldn't do. I'm talking about the facts. The only thing that deters a suicide bomber is the knowledge that if he pulls the trigger or blows himself up, his sister will be raped. That's all. That's the only thing that will bring him back home in order to preserve his sister's honor. So, this is the kind of stuff that's floating around in Israeli academia. And again, as I say in the article, academics, modern day academics, are famous. Well, not just modern day academics, but academics generally are famous for saying some of the most inhumane, and outright stupid things that have ever been said in history. Right? So the monopoly on stupid statements made by academia is not a monopoly that's held by Israel. That this is the world over. Academics, unfortunately, are generally speaking out to lunch, and many of them, of course, are good people. I know many of them, and they're good people. But I'm sorry, what passes for intellectual academic study today is entirely weak and pathetic. Again, another topic. So we get back to this Israeli professor who says these things, who's actually promoting rape of people who are innocent, who are not combatants. Of course, this is a war crime, to be quite honest. But he says, the Bar Ilan University, of course, has to give a statement because this has gained a lot of traction here in the West, or at least a lot of attention in the West. Well, let me bring that in. I constantly in the show say things that aren't technically true and have to rein it back simply because we live in a world where things are so absurd. So I have to rein back and give you the more accurate idea is that this statement has received some attention amongst anti-Israel activists or pro-Palestinian activists, and it's more controversy in Israel among feminist groups, because funny thing about feminist groups, or even women in general, they don't like the idea of rape, sanctioned rape. And there is a letter sent by feminist activists to the president of Bar Ilan University, and that's Rabbi Professor Daniel Herskowitz, and he's the one who received the letter by these feminist groups, and it says they oppose Kedar's, quote, words of incitement that grant legitimacy to Israeli Defense Force soldiers and Israeli civilians to commit rape and endanger both Israeli and Palestinian women. Kedar's words echo expressions that treat rape as a remedial practice, although it is a war crime, and that is the truth. But Bar Ilan has, the university has released a statement where they walk back on it. They say no, he wasn't calling for rape, and he was just using absurdity to make a point. Well, that's something. Alright, so we only have a little bit of time left in this segment, so we've got to go to what is essentially a local issue here near Florence. We have Myrtle Beach. Well, actually it's in Myrtle's Inlet, but it's pretty close to Myrtle Beach. For those of you who have never been there, you'll know where that's at. we had a situation, and Heather Callahan has an article up entitled "Horrible Whodunit: Vandals Destroy Tens of Thousands of Bees." And we have this this gentleman, Stephen Mantell. He's a beekeeper, and he keeps these bees in his backyard, and he came out recently to find all of his beehives destroyed. They had been kicked over and wrecked and all that kind of stuff. And the idea here is that there's no proof about who did this, right? He's worked with these bees for 10 years. He's had about 30,000 bees, he estimates, have died. But that's just the initial estimates. He thinks it's going to go up. And he doesn't really have the money to continue doing this because, believe it or not, beekeeping does cost a lot of money and take a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. So what you'll see is that when you showing you the quality of American intellectual capabilities now, you'll post this article up or you send it out to people and they'll say, it's a bear. The guy's crazy. It's a bear. Well, if you read the article instead of reading the title, you'll find out that there were shoe prints on the beekeeping boxes, right? So unless the bear put on a pair of Reeboks, no, it wasn't a bear. So, again, this is Myrtle's Inlet, South Carolina home. So here we have Mantell. He received a letter from his homeowners association. Well, there you go. The homeowners association, HOA, Shukara Development, requesting that he remove his hives. He responded to them highlighting the fact that the hives do not violate any HOA regulations. This damn HOA needs to be removed. It needs to be banned. These things are not part of even the local governments. They're basically just almost corporate entities, and they have to be done away with. These things are drastic overreach, and the housing authority or homeowners associations should be eliminated completely. And anybody who really likes to spend their time on this, the little volunteers that want to get on the boards and stuff, you people are pathetic. You got nothing better to do with your lives than to make up ridiculous, stupid rules for people who paid to live on their property, paid for their house, and have actually had a real job for their entire life. You want to get on these committees and make these nonsensical rules? Get a life. Alright, so before this resolution could be reached, this guy's hives were destroyed, and he said he doesn't expect anything to come from the police report he filed. He said that whoever did not like his bees should have found a better way to get rid of them. Well, unfortunately, what should have happened is whoever kicked over those bee boxes should have been shot. But this is really just something that irritates me. You can see the video of what happened to the hives there in the article. So there's apparently 62 million people in the U.S. who belong to a homeowners association. And here let me read you this this quote from the article. And before we go to break here, it says, if you're one of the 62 million people living in the U.S. who belongs to an HOA, you're under yet another set of jurisdiction, rule of law within housing limits. In fact, we are actually running out of time for this segment. I'm going to have to get to this when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. On the other side, we'll be right back after this.
Another major story tonight. After 14 days of war, 571 Palestinians are dead in Gaza, most of them civilians, 121 children. 7 Israeli soldiers were killed today. They have battled over the Gaza Strip since it became a home for Arabs displaced by the creation of Israel in 1948. Hamas, the militant group that runs Gaza, is launching rockets into Israel, demanding an end to a 7-year Israeli blockade. Israeli ground forces moved in last week, and we have reports from each side. First, Barry Peterson.
The skyline of Gaza is draped in clouds from constant shelling and shooting in the streets by Israeli soldiers. And with the war, the never-ending aftermath, the desperate search for survivors. Sometimes people are found, lives saved, sometimes not. These days in Gaza, death comes without warning and sometimes without making much sense. A shell hit here last night. It killed 6 members of a family. The 7th, a child, is still missing. Hassan el-Halak survived, his face scorched by the blast. His wife and 2 sons gone in an instant. His oldest boy, Kenan, was 6. Now el-Halak suffers a father's agony.
When I remember him, I remember his smile, and I found myself helpless. I could not save him.
Relatives came to the morgue to take away the bodies of his wife and children, his mother, his sister who was pregnant, and a 2-year-old child.
I am helpless. I don't know what's next. I cannot imagine. How can I start again?
At the nearby mosque, a brief prayer service. Then a procession down the street, ending at the graveyard. Yesterday, the el-Halaks were a large and vibrant family. Tonight, they are statistics. More names on the list of the dead, more torment for the living. The growing death toll does not appear to be affecting morale in Gaza, at least not publicly. But keep in mind that openly opposing Hamas or the war with Israel can be very dangerous here, Scott.
For more news, visit pigminews.com.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.tv.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Just want to remind you one more time that you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.tv. Now, before the break, we were talking about the situation in Murrells Inlet, South Carolina, with this gentleman who had his bees destroyed. And I can't spend too much more time on this, but I wanted to read a quote from you, from the article to you. And the article is entitled, Horrible Whodunit, Vandals Destroy Tens of Thousands of Bees by Heather Callahan at Activist Post. And it has to do with the Homeowners Association. That's what the article says. If you're one of 62 million people in the U.S. who belongs to an HOA, that's the Homeowners Association, you're under yet another set of jurisdiction, rule of law within housing limits. While HOAs are subject to statutes regarding nonprofit corporations, they aren't really regulated. Their word stands. HOA standards are supposed to be beneficial, and the people who pay their dues expect to have a voice. But that isn't always the case. Imagine getting threatened with a foreclosure lien and $8,000 in fines, not because you didn't pay your dues, but because you placed an American flag near your doorstep. Or how about getting sued by your HOA for planting flowers? Raising an eyebrow in the HOA's direction seems extreme. Look what happens when WBTW News 13 tries to get answers about Shakora Development's rules. And there's a video on that article where you can see just what she's talking about. So important to check that out. And do give a call to the Homeowners Association if you can dig up the number. I don't think it's in the article, but please give a call to the Homeowners Association and let them know what pieces of trash you think they are, whether they did this to the bees or whether they didn't. We can't say that they did, although there is a lot of evidence pointing to the HOA, but it doesn't matter. They're trash anyway. So call them and tell them that you oppose the fact that they have no real authority. They're not a government agency. They're not a government entity. They're just a group of non-profit organization control freaks who want to make obsessive, ridiculous rules for people who are trying to just go on about their lives and pay their mortgage and have a normal life, but they can't do it because of pricks like this. So please give them a call, let them know, and just what the hell, be as colorful as you want to be. I'm tired of telling people to be holding things back. So just say whatever you want. All right. So the Malaysia flight. We've got to talk about the Malaysia flight because everybody's talking about the Malaysia flight. They can't stop talking about it. This will probably be the case for another week. and then it'll fade off, and we'll have some other catastrophe that we're talking about, some celebrity's boobs or some, act on TV or a television show, or maybe another manufactured crisis. Who knows? These things change from week to week. And we can't go chasing each and every one of them down and exposing each and every one of them, because that only does so much, and it keeps us running out of steam. But since everybody's talking about the Malaysia flight, let's get to it. So, I've got 2 articles out on this, and I haven't done any more because it's been, taken over by other media outlets. For instance, Tony Carlucci has written a number of excellent articles about this Malaysian flight. InfoWars, Prison Planet, I've done a lot of articles about the Malaysian flight. A number of other organizations. Activist Post has other articles besides me, the anti-media as well. So I'm not going to keep chasing the Malaysian flight. The stuff has been documented as a fraud. We know that whatever Skull and Bones Carrie says is a lie. Whatever Marie Harf or Marie Barf has to say about it is a lie. It's a State Department lie. But let's point out a few of them. All right, 2 articles I've got are Malaysian flight shot down over Ukraine, Kiev government implicated, and of course the more detailed 6 reasons to question the official story of the Malaysian flight over Ukraine. Well, let's take a look at what the propaganda says first. Propaganda says that essentially an innocent airliner, was flying over Ukrainian airspace, and basically Russia shot it down, or at the very least, Russian-backed insurgents shot it down. Now, the idea that it could have been anything other than Russia, or could have been anything other than the Russian-backed insurgents, is not even entertained. Not even entertained. So, I'm going to get into one of those articles here. Let's pull this up. Let's see. Alright, so, again, not even entertained as a possibility that it could have been the Ukrainian government. You had people like John McCain, once again, going across the country, frothing at the mouth, trying to promote war with Russia, because this insane lunatic who works for the International Republican Institute, the Color Revolution organization under the NED, check that out, promoting war with Russia, as he always does. He says it's a crime against humanity if it's the Donetsk rebels. It's a war crime if it's the Russians. If it's Ukraine, the Ukrainian government, crickets. Not a possibility. They just didn't do it. All right. So that's what you're getting in the Western media, and I've run up against this too. That I'm convinced that no amount of dumbed down propaganda will not work on the American people. The next time they'll just get up with crayons and a whiteboard, and the next thing you'll know is that the American people are running around saying that, big purple aliens are trying to invade, so now we have to invade, Bosnia or something. I don't know. It's ridiculous, the propaganda and the levels to which it's not even good propaganda anymore. You just get statements from people like Kerry, you get statements from people like McCain, and the average public who has the critical thinking skills of a 4-year-old, probably even less, just eat it up. And they go with that because they watched television all their life. They were planted in front of a television since the day they were born, and they were raised on it. And that's the real parent. Mammals learn from their parents. So the mammals in the United States learn from a box. So here's some of the questions. All right, we have the question of what shot the plane down. Was it a jet? Was it a shoulder-fired missile? Was it a Butte missile system? Buck missile system, Butte missile system. Not sure quite what terminology is for that. Well, the idea is that it's largely been settled that this was a Butte missile system that brought it down. Shoulder-fired missiles could not hit this plane, which was flying at 33,000 feet. Coincidentally, 33,000 feet. But shoulder-fired missiles couldn't hit the plane flying at this altitude, right? So we've settled on largely Buke missile systems. So who has Buke missile systems? Well, we know the Russians have the Buke missile systems. They made it. We know the Ukrainian government has Buke missile systems. They got them from Russia. Now, do the rebels have Buke missile systems? And the answer is maybe. We don't know for sure. There are reports. There's not reports. There's one report that came out of Voice of Russia, which said that the Donetsk rebels seized a military base that contained Buke missile systems, and now they have access to it, and they have them in their possession. One Russian media report. It's not likely that Russia gave the rebels Buke missile systems. They're too sophisticated. They're too deadly. It's not likely that Russia would give that to an organization of rebels that could then turn around and resist them in some way. So, not likely that they were given that. What's funny is that when you hear the Russian media say the Ghouta chemical weapons attack in Syria was actually the work of the death squads, what we hear in the U.S. media is, oh, the Russian media is not credible, they don't have the same standards that we have, it's all propaganda. When you see Putin or the Russian media make reports that the United States is trying to frame Syria or frame the Donetsk rebels for political purposes to justify an invasion, you hear in the American media, oh, the Russian media doesn't have the same standards that we have. It's all propaganda. When there's one isolated report that's 3 paragraphs long found in the Russian media suggesting the Donetsk rebels have taken over a military base that contains Buke missiles, then all of a sudden we hear, look, there's proof, incontrovertible proof, that the rebels have Buke missile systems. All right, it's proven in the Russian media. So I got a question. How can the Russian media be completely propaganda and have no standards on one issue, but on another issue provide incontrovertible proof within 3 paragraphs that are very vague, to say the least? Well, the reason for that is the Western media, of course, is propaganda itself. You are being propagandized to believe all this stuff. But let's just say that the Anglo-American establishment has changed its tune and that it says that the Russian media now has credibility. Fine. I've got a report too. It comes from Itar TASS, right? Another big Russian media organization. It says, on Wednesday, the day before the plane was brought down, we had Buke missile systems mobilized by the Ukrainian government and moved into the Donetsk region, the area where this plane was shot down, within just a few miles of where this plane was shot down. So, you want to play the game of Russian media reports? Let's play the game of Russian media reports. We will win on that one. So, again, no credible evidence that the Ukrainian rebels have the Buke missile systems, although it is a possibility. I'm not going to sit here and argue that they don't. Possibility that they do. And again, but we know that the Kiev forces have the missile system. All right. Now, the question of the people whom we know have the missile system, did they fire upon the plane? Well, the idea is that Russia, from the propaganda area, is saying that Russia shot the plane down, right? Maybe even it was a mistake because the plane was seen as potentially violating Russian airspace. But the problem was it was flying away from Russia. It wasn't flying toward Russia. If it was an accident, let's not forget that the United States shot down an Iranian airplane. Russia shot down a commercial airliner before as well because of deviation from flight path. So it wouldn't exactly be a World War scenario if it did happen, but it didn't. There's no evidence, again, absolutely no evidence that Russia shot it down. That is the one that's unbelievable. largely unbelievable. I guess it is conceivable, but not believable. The Ukrainian military, however, mobilizes Butte missile systems, moves them into the area where this was, where the plane was brought down, and before I go any further, let me point out the fact that the Malaysian plane was actually flying over restricted airspace. Right? The FAA put out a directive that prohibited American airlines and pilots and charter flights and so forth from flying over this area. So it's not believable that the rest of the aviation societies and agencies didn't know that this was an area that you shouldn't be flying in. So why was it flying over there to begin with? That's one question. And why did it lower its speed and lower its altitude right when it came over an area of fighting? Well, there's an answer to that. They were directed to do so, and this is according to credible reports, by the Ukrainian aviation authorities, by the Ukrainian air traffic control. They were told to lower their speed. There's credible evidence, there's credible reports that the jet was escorted by 2 Ukrainian fighter jets up until 3 minutes before it was shot down. It was then ordered to lower its speed, lower its altitude, and it was shot down. Shortly after the plane was shot down, the Ukrainian authorities go into the air traffic control tower and they seize all the records. Now, why would they do that? Okay? So think about that. You got to look at the timing of the event as well. We have it comes a day after the Ukrainian military claimed that Russia shot down a jet fighter. May or may not have happened. Russia's been taking shelling that's been coming across the border from Ukraine for several days, hitting Russian villages. At some point, you've got to respond and force the respect of your territory. It came a few days after the Western media had seized on a report suggesting that the Russian government was considering targeted strikes inside Ukraine. And of course, this was sort of taking this out of context, right? They've taken a statement by one Russian politician that he made in the parliament, and they've made this as if it is the official word of the Russian government. It's not. It's like taking Lindsey Graham or something and saying that because Lindsey Graham said it, that is the position of the U.S. government. Now, granted, he does represent the oligarchy, and he's sort of the mouthpiece and workhorse of the oligarchy, but Lindsey Graham is a senator, he's not the president. And this Russian politician that made the statement is not the president or the prime minister. And of course, we got to note that this came shortly before Israel launched its genocide campaign in Gaza. It came a few hours after the United States issued a statement announcing more sanctions against Russia, which, by the way, has hurt gun owners because of the ban of import and sale of parts and guns made in Russia. So the AKs that you had are not worth what they once were, shall we say. So, let's see, we've got a few more minutes here. So I want to point out, this is the second Malaysian 777 plane that disappeared. One disappeared over the Indian Ocean, and this one disappears over Ukraine. Of course, we know where this one ended up. All right, so more questions. Questions about the bodies. Step back. The most important thing is the American proof. We've got to look at the American proof. So far, Russia has released satellite imagery of the Kiev government and its mobilization of missile systems. It's released satellite imagery and aviation air traffic control radar maps and radar data that shows where the plane was, how high it was, and the speed it was going at. It's released all that information because it apparently has nothing to hide. The United States has released zero. The United States has its evidence based on Twitter, Facebook, and quote-unquote intelligence. Now, I got to ask, is this the type of intelligence that told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Is this the same type of intelligence that told us that Assad gassed his own people? Well, probably. because it's all lies. It's not intelligence at all. It's a lie. Now, what about Facebook? What about Twitter? We have this supposed admission of guilt by the Donetsk, or should I say the East Ukrainian separatists. The separatist leader apparently tweeted out that they had brought a plane down. Well, here's a few things. One of the things is that he tweeted out, or this Twitter account tweeted out that they had brought down a cargo plane. Okay, which that indicates that whoever had this account, the separatists, didn't think that they had shot down a civilian airliner. They thought they had shot down a cargo plane from Ukraine. They thought they had fired on a plane, a military plane. But it turns out that it's not even the Twitter account of the separatist leader. It's a fan page. So, sorry, not an official declaration by the separatist leader. He's probably too busy to be playing on Twitter in any event. Not like the U.S. State Department, right? I guess maybe Marie Barth has time to play on her Twitter account and diddle around on Facebook, but other people have better things to do. And if you're a separatist leader in East Ukraine, you're more likely focused on the battle as opposed to tweeting. So, more likely is that this was a fan page. Obviously, it was a fan page, but it was manned by people on the ground who were simply observing this, and were observing this from an area where they couldn't tell exactly what type of plane that it was. Now, we have video evidence of a separatist leader speaking with the Russian commander. They're talking about the shooting down of the civilian airliner. All this was on YouTube, and it's all it's proof. It's proof that the rebels shot it down with the knowledge of Russia. Of course, the video was fake. It was entirely fake. It was heavily edited. Things were brought from 3 different discussions, edited and put together to make it look like it was one. So that is one cynical, poor, disgusting attempt at propaganda. And it didn't work on us, hopefully the listeners of this radio show, but it's unfortunately working on a lot of people. So you've got to combat this, but where you can, of course. So these are some of the issues that keep coming up. Of course, the bodies, the fear-mongering over the rebels moving the bodies. The separatists are moving the bodies. Yeah, because they've been in the sun for 2 days, and they can't get to them because the Ukrainian government has launched an assault on the very area of the crime scene. Now, if they were interested in the truth coming out, why would you launch an assault on the crime scene? Well, that's to cover it up. That's to cover it up. That's to damage it so bad that you can't get any credible evidence from the scene. So this is not really hard to determine. There is talk about these bodies that were found strewn about that were in what is described as an advanced state of decay. Very shortly after the crash. So one has to wonder what that is. What's going on with that? So Putin has satellite imagery. Kerry has Facebook. Putin has radar data. Kerry has Twitter. Putin has intelligence. Kerry has intelligence in quotes. So we gotta look at this and say that there is absolutely no credible evidence that Russia was involved in this, or that the Ukrainian separatists were in any way involved in this. This was most likely shot down by the Ukrainian government at the behest of the Western powers in order to frame the Ukrainian separatists and Russia and promote a confrontation between those two powers. That's all it is. And, again, we can continue to look at this and continue to go through all the minute details, but, we can't waste valuable time on this little plane here. In fact, it appears that things are being arranged in terms of a truce, and not of a truce, but in terms of an international inspection and so forth. And hopefully they will have an investigation that will bring about the truth, but most likely not. In any event, so we got to move on to, last but not least, I want to draw your attention to an article that was published on July 22nd by Dan Burdorf. He was a guest on this show. And this is called An Open Letter from a Third-Party Spoiler. And it's a pretty good article. He lays out the fact that he's not naive about where he stands in terms of his chances of being elected, and he's well aware of the fact that so many Democrats and Republicans whine and complain about third parties costing them the vote. But he is trying to step outside of the dialectic. He's trying to appeal to both Democrats, to Republicans, and to everybody with a functioning brain in between. And of course, his platform is one that I have spoken about many times here: the Wall Street sales tax. If Wall Street pays no tax, they should be taxed at 1%. He wants to end free trade, and this the only thing you trade, of course, is your jobs overseas. And so, there's a joke. I heard Tanya Lewis made a joke that, I lost my job, so I called an investigator, and he told me that he found it. It was in India. So this is the type of economic platforms that we need here. This idea of a 1% Wall Street sales tax, the nationalization of the Fed, the use of 0% interest credit, century bonds to jumpstart infrastructure and the recovery, and then the long-term investment in real business and real development and real scientific progress, as well as the stepping away of free trade. You impose 15% tariffs and so forth to prevent those jobs from going overseas, and of course many more. But I wanted to draw your attention to that. The open letter from a third-party spoiler by Dan Burdorf, and it's danfornebraska.com, where you can find that article. And we don't have much time left in the show tonight, so I want to remind you to catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night and Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY. Also, check activistpost.com, theantimedia.org, and of course, BrandonTurbeville.com, which is the website where I repost all of my work. And please remember, if you are planning to pass through the area, or if you are in the area, then remember to check out the health talks and the screenings, documentary screenings that take place at Health First, 311 West Palmetto Street, Florence, South Carolina, 29501. They're on. They will take place at 7 p.m. at Tuesday night. So, again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in tonight. We're going to hopefully bring you some good guests in the future and try to stay on top of these current events, as well as bring a historical perspective to it as well. So thank you for listening tonight. This has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
Since this latest ground assault on Gaza got underway last Thursday, more than 600 Palestinians have been killed. Our Paula Hancock's reports a large number of the dead are children. And just a warning, some of the images you're about to see are disturbing.
For more news, visit pigmynews.com.
This is Ozzy Skateboard.